He's liable.
Welcome back, Creepy Kitties! This is Aiden, and this is our third video in the Lon Chaney tribute series. Once again, I had a guest star lined up for this one, and once again the guest star backed out, so now it's up to me to talk about Lon Chaney's performance as Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So, the big question about this movie is, does it count as a horror movie, and does Quasimodo count as a monster? Well, that's a really tricky subject. First of all, it's kind of interesting that Lon Chaney is remembered as horror's first big superstar, when in fact, very few of his movies could actually be called horror movies. Phantom of the Opera, sure, it has a lot of horror tropes in it, or it started a lot of horror tropes. London After Midnight, yeah, if you can nitpick that and say it's a mystery film, but the presence of a supernatural creature, even a fake one, I think puts it in horror. Hunchback of Notre Dame, what makes this a horror movie? And I guess the answer to that is it a horror story? And both the movie and the novel it's based on by Victor Hugo, which I've never read, they're gothic. There's that. So I guess that's a step in the direction, but do they count as horror movies or do they count as period dramas? I don't know. But there's very few other categories that myself or a lot of other people can think Hunchback of Notre Dame properly belongs in, other than just the classic section of your movie shelf. It's a video store reference that nobody born after 2000 will get. Does Quasimodo count as a monster? And that's a very tricky question. First of all, I'm not even going to address the topic of if people who are born with deformities and stuff like that count as monsters, because obviously the answer to that is no. Now, getting back to the fictional world of the movies, does Quasimodo count as a monster? In the traditional sense that we think of as movie monsters as, big scary things that carry off screaming women and attack cities and drink blood or bite people or transform with the full moon, no, Quasimodo doesn't count as any of that. Horror artist Pete Von Scholey once famously said in one of his cartoons that both the Hunchback of Notre Dame and the Phantom of the Opera aren't monsters, they're just two very ugly Frenchmen. Jokes aside, there is merit to that statement. In other senses of the word, does Quasimodo count as a monster? The question to that is, why do we resist calling Quasimodo a monster? And I think that's because a lot of us, when we think of monsters, the very first thing we think of monsters in stories is as antagonists or bad guys, or even ones that are sort of misunderstood but still do bad things, like the Frankenstein monster or King Kong. They're sympathetic, but we're totally fine with calling those monsters. Now, Quasimodo, what is so wrong with calling him a monster? I think the question we're really avoiding is, does Quasimodo count as a villain or as an antagonist? And the answer to that is absolutely not. Quasimodo could be a hero or anti-hero, depending on how you interpret the story, but I think most everybody who watches The Hunchback of Notre Dame, pretty much any version of it, would argue that Quasimodo is a sympathetic and very likable character. I'm hard-pressed to think of any version of it that presented Quasimodo as unlikable or a jerk or something that deserved to be chased down by a mob of pitchfork and torch-wielding lunatics. You can think of him as a monster in the good sense, in very much the Guillermo del Toro sense of looking at monsters as beautiful, misunderstood, poetic beings, and that's absolutely viable. I'm positive Del Toro likes Quasimodo and whatever versions of it. There's probably a bunch of it in his Bleak House. It's totally fine to call Quasimodo a monster in that regards, because Quasimodo is unusual. He's only a monster in regards to him being unique and unusual, and someone who is inclined to cause fright at first glance, but once you realize that not only is he a beautiful, poetic human being, but a lot of the things that we mistook about him as being monstrous are just part of his personality, or part of his history, and what he has overcome and worked with, and what has made him the individual that we all know and love, because Quasimodo is very much a lovable individual. There's a reason why the Americanization of Notre Dame of of Paris is called The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It's because Quasimodo completely stole the show. He is the most memorable character in that story, and however many of the dozens and dozens of other characters who were in both the novel and the film version that I'm referring to today, not a single one of them, even the ones that come close like Esmeralda, not one of them really ever sticks with you the way that Quasimodo does. So in that regards, I have no idea what my point was other than Quasimodo is a lovable monster and we all want to just give him a great big hug. I don't know if my arms could reach around the hump, but you know what, Quasimodo, you're a great guy. Chaney, you did a great job bringing him to life with that makeup. Could not have been easy, but you gave us a wonderful film performance and one of horror cinema's first heroic monsters. So thank you very much, guys, again, for following along in this mini-series dedicated to Lon Chaney. We'll be revisiting him again someday when we have to do Phantom of the Opera. But for here and now, these 3 drawing videos hopefully will have shed some light on a wonderful artist. Okay, guys, tune in next time. Bye-bye.
Lon Chaney's gonna get you if you don't watch out. He's liable to pounce upon you.